Imagine you push through a set of swinging doors into a wall of cigar smoke. It's 5 cents a cigar, and every man in the room is smoking one. Someone hands you a beer. It's warm, 60 degrees, barely any foam, and you drink it fast, because in about 4 minutes it'll be flat and undrinkable. Your elbows are on a long wooden bar that runs the length of the room. Above you, along the balcony, there are 14 small boxes with curtains drawn across them. That's more or less what it felt like to walk into the richest building in a western mining town. But here's the thing. It wasn't just whiskey. It was arithmetic, theater, debt, and the single most reliable way to get rich in the American West, which had almost nothing to do with gold. Everyone knows the story. Men went west, dug into a mountain, and came out rich. Almost nobody did. The mines ruined most of the people who worked them. Veins ran out. Claims got jumped. Water flooded the shafts. Meanwhile, the man selling those miners their drinks was doing something very different. He was collecting a small tax on hope every single night, whether the mountain paid out or not. Saloons came in 3 tiers. At the bottom, dives. In the middle, working men's bars. At the top, establishments like the White Elephant in Fort Worth or the Vaudeville in San Antonio. Smoking parlors up front, wine rooms in back, private gaming rooms, a stage, a restaurant. A beer cost 5 cents. A whiskey cost 25. A cigar, 5. In 1891, a .45 cartridge ran about 2.5 cents. So a drink in a nice saloon cost roughly 10 bullets. 25 cents was 2 bits. Hold on to that phrase. And the margins underneath those prices were beautiful. Beer was routinely cut with water. Whiskey ran a healthy markup on wholesale. And that's before you consider what happened glass by glass. When a customer bought a drink for one of the women working the room, she got a shot glass of cold tea or sugared water, colored to look right, charged at full whiskey price. Today, we call that a microtransaction. In Deadwood, they called it Tuesday. By the early 1880s, breweries figured out they could skip the middleman entirely. The British tied house system crossed the Atlantic. The brewery owns the saloon. The saloon sells only that brewery's beer. Schlitz built gorgeous ones. It's the Coca-Cola exclusivity contract 100 years early. There was a man in Texas named Roy Bean who ran a saloon and a courtroom out of the same building. The sign read, "Law west of the Pecos." He could sentence you and sell you your last drink without leaving the room. That last part is worth sitting with for a second, because it tells you exactly how blurry the line was. Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, Doc Holliday, Ben Thompson. Every one of them tended bar or dealt cards at some point. Law, crime, and liquor weren't 3 industries out there. They were one. Which brings us to the back of the room. The game was faro. Players loved it because it had the lowest house edge of any game on the floor, which is precisely why the dealing boxes were rigged so often. They called playing it bucking the tiger, after the tiger printed on the card backs. Around those tables were the professional gamblers, sporting men, working a code that amounted to shoot first, ask later. Under the Birdcage Theater in Tombstone, there was a basement poker game. Legend has it that it ran continuously for 8 years, 5 months, and 3 days. 24 hours a day, no closing. Minimum buy-in? $1,000. Somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000 in today's money, depending on whose conversion you trust. Around $10 million supposedly changed hands. The house took 10%. Historians argue about the duration, and you should take the exact figures with salt. But run the math on the legend anyway. $1 million off one basement table. The players reportedly included Doc Holliday, Bat Masterson, Wyatt Earp, Diamond Jim Brady, George Hurst, father of William Randolph, and Adolphus Bush. Yes, that Bush. The brewer was sitting at the table, coming back for his margin through a second door. The Birdcage opened on Christmas Day, 1881, and then didn't close for 8 years. Not at night, not on holidays. No windows to speak of, no clocks, no reason to ever leave. A design philosophy that Las Vegas would later spend billions perfecting. The name came from 14 suspended boxes along 2 balconies, each with a curtain you could pull. Here's the part I find hardest to shake. The couple who built it, Billy and Lottie Hutchinson, wanted a family variety theater. Their opening event was a free evening for the respectable women of Tombstone. In a town full of unmarried men, it flopped. They sold. Virtue didn't pay. The other thing did. The oldest pivot story in business, running about 140 years ahead of Silicon Valley. Under the new owners, it leaned all the way in. Strong woman acts, cross-dressing sketches, music around the clock. In 1882, the New York Times called it the wildest, most depraved den between Basin Street and the Barbary Coast, which turned out to be the finest free advertising a saloon ever received. Eastern moral outrage was Western marketing. More than 120 bullet holes are still in the building. Up in Deadwood, the Gem Theater ran prize fights in a ring 5 feet by 5 feet. There was no prize. The fighters weren't professionals. They were ordinary miners convinced to beat each other bloody for nothing while the house sold drinks to the crowd watching. Users generate the content. The platform takes the money. Here's what tends to get lost in all the gold dust and gunfights. Al Swearingen, who owned the Gem, placed advertisements in Eastern newspapers. Housekeeping work, waitressing, hotel jobs, sometimes a career on stage in his theater. And he paid for the travel himself, a train ticket, one way. When the women arrived in Deadwood, there was no job. There was no money. There was no way home. There was a debt, the price of the ticket, and one method he permitted for repaying it. Those who refused were put out into a mining camp with nothing. Some got sick and died of malnutrition and exposure. Some took their own lives rather than stay. The ones who remained were, by every account, permanently bruised. This is not a story about a lawless frontier that hadn't gotten around to having rules yet. In 1887, 11 years after the camp was founded, in a town with an elected mayor, Swearingen held 2 married performers at the Gem against their will and refused to pay them. Their husbands had to petition the mayor personally to get them out. The town knew. Prominent citizens supported the place. The authorities left it alone. It was the economic engine of Deadwood, and it was also a family attraction. In the summer of 1877, the hall was packed to see an 8-year-old performer named Baby McDonald on stage with her father. Miners, shopkeepers, wives, children, every seat taken. Same building, same night, 1 floor apart. And the mechanism that made this possible wasn't ignorance. It was vocabulary. Soiled dove, painted lady, sporting man, variety theater, boarding house. The frontier built an entire dictionary for talking about the upstairs without ever naming it. And that dictionary is what let everyone downstairs keep applauding. Inside the Gem, a dance cost 10 cents, a beer, 20. A bottle of wine, $1. Set the dime against what that building took in on a good night, and you have the whole argument. So what happened to all this money? The Gem burned in 1879. Swearingen rebuilt it, bigger. It burned in 1894. He rebuilt it again. It burned in 1899, and that time he left Deadwood for good. He prospected around Leadville, took work in potato fields, and drifted to Denver, where the people knew him as Albert Ellis. He died in 1904. The coroner listed his possessions: a cheap watch, a knife, and a stick of dynamite. Tombstone drowned. Water flooded the silver mines, the veins gave out, and the birdcage was locked up in 1889 with everything still inside it. When new owners opened the doors in 1934, the bar was there, the poker tables were there, the paintings were still on the walls. 45 years, untouched. Deadwood had 25,000 people at its peak, Today, it has about 1,300. Which brings us back to 2 bits. The Spanish dollar circulated widely out west, and it was literally cut into 8 pieces. Pieces of 8. One piece was a bit, 12.5 cents. 2 of them made 25, the price of a drink in a first-class saloon. The expensive one. The drink you bought when you'd made it. Today, 2-bit is an insult. A 2-bit crook is a nobody, a nothing. Small change. The word for luxury became the word for worthless, which is a coincidence, not a causal chain, but it's the most honest summary of the entire frontier economy I can think of. Everything those men built turned into small change, usually within a decade, almost always before they died. The lot where the gem stood sat empty for years. In 1921, it became Deadwood's first gas station. Today, it's a casino. The place never stopped doing the same job. It just got a license.